today, Israel has officially notified the United Nations of its decision to cut ties with its agency for Palestinian refugees, UNRWA, as the UN agency have warned of an impending famine in Gaza. In a statement earlier today, the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that it has now cancelled a cooperation agreement that goes back to 1967, which provided the legal basis of the country's relations with UNRWA. This is a story that, if you've seen, we've been following very closely. Are we surprised? Sadly, no. The Israeli government have shown time and time again that they're happy to slander, happy to undermine, and happy to actively target UNRWA in the work that they're doing. For reference, for the last 60 years, the UNRWA has been providing education, healthcare, other basic services to Palestinian refugees that were displaced during the original 1948 war that surrounded Israel's creation, and also supporting their descendants, who now make up 5.9 million people. Um, of those refugee families, they make up the majority of the 2.3 million population in Gaza, 9 out of 10 of which have been displaced. The UNRWA provide everything from healthcare to schooling, supporting refugees in Palestine and in occupied territories. They have been very heavily targeted as part of Israel's genocide. In these stats from Al Jazeera, you can see schools have been targeted, health facilities have been targeted, and along with other UN workers, more than 130 have been killed in the genocide so far. The ban, as it stands, that has passed through the Knesset, it came about as a result of two votes that were passed. The first one prevents any Israeli officials from having any contact with UNRWA. The second of these is banning them from carrying out any activity within Israel's borders. Naturally, this second vote that's passed, which is planned to come into force in 3 months, will make it literally impossible for the agency to obtain any entrance permits, anything that would allow them to operate in the occupied West Bank or the Gaza Strip, because both of those are under Israeli occupation. Obviously, this would be completely catastrophic. And for once, it's prompted a little bit of criticism from David Lammy, but don't get too excited. In an oral statement to the House last week, amongst the unabashed condemnation of Iran and the mealy mouthed virtue signaling and concerns, Lamy said that it's a matter of profound regret that the Israeli parliament is considering shutting down UNRWA's operations. The allegations against UNRWA staff earlier this year were fully investigated and offer no justification for cutting off ties with UNRWA, which seems strong so far. This weekend, we therefore joined partners in expressing concerns at the Knesset's legislation and urged Israel to ensure UNRWA's life saving work continues. Then we go a little off piste where he decides to call on UNRWA to continue their path to reform, demonstrating its commitment to the principle of neutrality. I don't know about you guys, but if I hear the word concern again from David Lammy, I might spontaneously combust. These weren't the only comments that were made by Lammy in the statement. So before we discuss it, I do just want to highlight another section of the statement here, which came towards the end, in which Lammy said that the government has stepped up our diplomatic engagement to this end in the pursuit of peace, obviously, as they've been calling for a ceasefire again and again. The Prime Minister has spoken directly to both Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Pezeshkian. While I have made 5 visits to the region in just 4 months, held around 50 calls and meetings with ministers and leaders in the region, and spoke this weekend to US Secretary Blinken just back from the region, Mr. Speaker, it is a source of deep frustration that these efforts have not yet succeeded. Can you guys believe that all of the visits and empty words didn't do anything? If only there was something that he could do, like sanctions, or perhaps bringing Israel's attempts to ban the largest humanitarian agency in the region to the International Court, which he did include in a statement the Norwegian government have actually done. But I guess we're just watching that pass. Um, Zoe, a lot of your advocacy work obviously revolves around the rights of refugees. I don't think people always get an idea of the sheer scale of work that is done by UNRWA. Would you be able to try and put this into a little bit of context for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's UNRWA has a unique mandate. Well, Palestinians basically have a sort of carve out unique status under international law, simply fundamentally because they are such a high proportion of them are refugees, and they make up such a big group of the refugee population of the world. So essentially, this is an entire UN agency that is dedicated just to their assistance, and that has to happen because they have been displaced over so many generations by Israeli settlement. And one of the things that's really interesting here, and I think that like brings together a lot of threads of what we're seeing happen at the moment. On the one hand, direct attacks around the world, and certainly in our own country, on the rights of refugees under international law. And then we're seeing this direct assault on basically the principles of international humanitarian law in Israel's actions, and its horrific assault on Gaza and Palestinians. Is like these two things work together to undermine the fundamental principles of international law that protect all of our rights. And that's happening in ways that intersect in really sort of messed up ways, because actually what the existence of UNRWA is actually almost always used as an excuse by Western countries to prevent them from having to provide adequate assistance to Palestinians as refugees, because Palestinians are carved out of protection of the Refugee Convention because they have to be protected by UNRWA. And if you are hampering, or let alone completely hamstringing, the ability of UNRWA to undertake its humanitarian work, then you are basically consigning millions of people to, I mean, their situations are already barbaric, but the little relief that Palestinians receive is overwhelmingly provided by this agency, and preventing it from operating. It's just another step, but like this sort of lifting of the veil, the abandoning of any pretense that there is any Palestinian who can be considered innocent or worthy of humanitarian assistance.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge chunk of like the global refugee population as well, right? Like it's this kind of sectioning off, like you said, of like it's a different circumstance, it's a different issue. It kind of it feeds into the entire narrative of like everything except Palestine in terms of making
Yeah.
progress or in terms of liberal values. And
Exactly. So if you are considered to be receiving assistance from UNRWA or from another UN refugee agency, of which there are two, the UN High Commission for Refugees, which runs the Refugee Convention, or UNRWA, then you are not entitled to help from the other one. So
right.
basically, anybody who is Palestinian is considered sort of automatically to be under the mandate of UNRWA. And that means it's much more difficult for refugees from Palestine to obtain full refugee status and protection under the law in other countries. So they are being, um, well, attacked by international law on all sides, actually.
hmm I mean, yeah, it's like they're internally displaced refugees. They are displaced within Israel,
Yeah.
occupied territory. So to cut off all contact with them and refuse to allow them to operate within those occupied territories. Um, I did think it was interesting that in like the FAQs, the official statement that the government released, they talked about how they joined 7 countries in expressing concerns about this vote.
Mm.
But then they did mention that Norway's taken it to the International Court of Justice to have it examined as breaking international law. But no, but
So
they're
just,
doing that. We're just
yeah,
gonna
and
let
we're
them
just
do
leaving
they
that
seem like
there.
they've
We're
got
just putting
that
that on the table there and
exactly.
looking at it and being very concerned.
Very
It's
concerned.
it's an awful sense of powerlessness that we've all been subjected to in this country. I think over the last year of this horrific war taking place, and feeling that like the obvious truth, and feeling so hamstrung, like so voiceless, because the people who supposedly represent us are there being like, yeah, looks concerning. Anyway,
Yeah, Norway's doing it. It's I mean, even I think it was earlier today or it was potentially yesterday that Byline Times published a piece where the former International Development Secretary for Tony Blair has written about how it's shameful that the UK government isn't standing up for international law. They accused the UK government of acting as the US's like lieutenant in this situation, which is obviously very scary given what we're looking at in the next few days with the US election. We still have people as well, like the Spectator. When I was looking up this story, there's an article from the Spectator 5 days ago that's just called "Israel is right about the UNRWA."
oh god, I mean,
It's so barefaced.
It's because anybody who humanizes, treats as human, or is, and many people who work for UNRWA are Palestinian, are just have to be completely dismissed. Their voice cannot be accepted to tell the truth, and their humanity cannot be accepted because it would make everything impossible and unbearable. Um, yeah, I mean, I've been working here in the UK just on the sort of like hypocrisy front. I've been working with a group of Palestinians who are here based in the UK, whether they're British nationality or they're here on a visa or they're here with refugee status. And they all have family members in Gaza. And they are asking for the same provisions to be made for their family members to be able to come and reunite with them here in the UK as was made for Ukrainians. And of course, we can't treat these two groups of people as though they were equally human, because if we do, then everything becomes
Then it
intolerable.
looks really bad.
And 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 these are British Palestinians. These are and there's so few of them here in the UK because, again, because of that distinction that carves out the rights of Palestinians to be able to seek safety in other places of the world. There are so few of them. We're talking about a few thousand people, all told, to protect all the family members of British Gazans, just while it is unlivable there, and that's too much because, and they get such horrific hatred when they're like speaking up and advocating for their cause. Um, it's just, and it really is a microcosm of what we're seeing about like the growing racism and division in our society. Palestinians are always at the sharpest end of this.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.